Isabella deserves everything. You're worthless and always have been, my mother Patricia declared, her voice cutting through the law office like a blade. I sat in the leather chair, my hands folded in my lap, watching her pace behind my sister with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. The mahogany-paneled conference room felt smaller with each passing second, the weight of her words pressing down on my chest like stones. My name is Natalie, and at 29 years old, I had spent most of my life being reminded that I was the disappointment, the burden, the daughter who never quite measured up. Isabella, 3 years younger and perpetually golden in our mother's eyes, sat primly beside Patricia, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the table in anticipation. The lawyers were running 10 minutes late, but Patricia couldn't contain her excitement any longer. Grandma Evelyn always knew Isabella was special, Patricia continued, her eyes gleaming with vindictive satisfaction. Beautiful, charming, everything a grandmother could want in a granddaughter. You were just there, an obligation. I felt the familiar sting of her words, but something deeper, a quiet strength I had cultivated over years of managing Grandma Evelyn's affairs, kept me steady. The ornate grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, marking time until the moment that would change everything. Patricia had no idea what was coming, and I found myself almost grateful for her cruelty. It would make what happened next feel like justice rather than revenge. I can't wait to redecorate Grandma's house, Isabella said dreamily, already planning her inheritance. Those antiques are so outdated. I'm thinking modern minimalist, maybe some of those expensive Italian fixtures I saw in Architectural Digest. Patricia beamed with pride. Whatever you want, darling. Evelyn's savings account should cover renovations easily. $25,000 goes quite far when you're smart about spending. I watched them discuss their plans, feeling like a ghost in my own family. They spoke about Grandma Evelyn's house, her jewelry collection, her modest savings account with such certainty, such entitlement. Not once did they mention the 3 years I had spent visiting Evelyn every Tuesday and Thursday, helping her organize her papers, listening to her stories, learning about the business investments she had carefully hidden from my mother's gambling addiction. The door handle turned and I straightened in my chair. The lawyers had arrived, carrying briefcases and wearing expressions that suggested this reading would be anything but routine. Patricia smoothed her hair and adjusted her jacket, preparing to collect what she believed was rightfully Isabella's. What my mother didn't know was that Grandma Evelyn had been far more perceptive than anyone gave her credit for, and infinitely more wealthy than my family had ever imagined. The months leading up to this moment had been filled with a careful dance between my grandmother and me, one that my mother and sister had been too self-absorbed to notice. As the lawyers settled into their seats, I felt the weight of 3 years of secret conversations, hidden documents, and careful planning. Grandma Evelyn's plan was about to unfold exactly as she had designed it, and my mother's cruelty would finally come with a price she never could have imagined. Every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 3 years, I had driven the 45 minutes from my apartment in downtown Phoenix to Grandma Evelyn's modest house in Scottsdale, ostensibly to help her with household tasks and provide companionship in her later years. What actually happened during those visits was far more complex. Evelyn would brew her signature lavender tea, settle into her favorite recliner, and begin discussing her little project's business investments she had been making for over 2 decades. Most people saw Evelyn as a sweet, elderly woman living on Social Security and a small pension from her late husband's construction job. The reality was that she owned controlling interests in 5 different companies, ranging from a successful catering business to a small but profitable tech consulting firm. Patricia has a problem, Natalie, Evelyn had confided in me during one of our early conversations. I've watched her gamble away 3 different windfall payments over the years, her father's life insurance, the settlement from her car accident, even the money I gave her for Isabella's college fund. All of it disappeared into those slot machines at Talking Stick Casino. I had suspected as much. Patricia's frequent business trips to nearby casinos, her mood swings that coincided with mysterious financial stress, and her constant requests for loans from Evelyn had painted a clear picture. What I hadn't realized was how methodically Evelyn had been protecting her assets from my mother's addiction. I need someone I can trust to help me manage these investments, Evelyn had said, sliding a folder across her kitchen table. Someone who won't see dollar signs and forget about responsibility. The folder contained corporate documents, financial statements, and partnership agreements worth approximately $18 million. Evelyn had spent decades quietly building this business empire, reinvesting profits and expanding her holdings while maintaining the facade of a simple retiree. She had chosen me as her successor, not out of favoritism, but out of necessity. Patricia's gambling debts had put creditors on alert, and they were already sniffing around Evelyn's estate, hoping to collect when she passed. Your mother believes I have $25,000 in savings and a house worth maybe $200,000, Evelyn had explained with a slight smile. Let her continue believing that. These businesses need protection from her creditors, and more importantly, they need someone who understands their value. I had spent those 3 years learning every aspect of Evelyn's investments, meeting with corporate attorneys, understanding cash flow statements, and ensuring that the business succession would be legally airtight. Patricia and Isabella had occasionally made snide comments about my charity work with Evelyn, never bothering to ask what we actually discussed during our long afternoons together. Now, as Mr. Thompson, the primary estate attorney, settled into his chair and began arranging documents, I felt the weight of those secret conversations. Evelyn's plan was about to unfold exactly as she had designed it, and my mother's cruelty would finally come with consequences she never could have imagined. The distinguished attorney cleared his throat and opened the official will document, his reading glasses perched carefully on his nose. Patricia and Isabella leaned forward eagerly, while I remained composed, my heart beating steadily as the moment of revelation approached. The last will and testament of Evelyn Marie Cooper. Mr. Thompson began formally. I, Evelyn Marie Cooper, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my worldly possessions as follows. Patricia gripped Isabella's hand, both women barely containing their excitement. They had been anticipating this moment for months, ever since Evelyn's health had begun declining. I watched them with a mixture of sadness and determination, knowing that their joy would be short-lived but necessary. To my granddaughter Isabella, I leave my family home at 1247 Saguaro Lane, including all furnishings, fixtures, and personal belongings contained within. Additionally, I bequeath to Isabella my complete jewelry collection and the contents of my savings account at Desert Vista Credit Union. Isabella squealed with delight, her hands flying to her mouth in theatrical surprise. Patricia began crying tears of what appeared to be gratitude, though I suspected they were tears of relief at securing what she believed would solve her mounting debts. They embraced dramatically, while Mr. Thompson continued reading the formal language of the bequest. The jewelry alone must be worth $40,000, Patricia whispered loudly to Isabella. And that house is in such a desirable neighborhood now with all the new development. I felt a familiar pang of exclusion as they celebrated, but it was quickly replaced by anticipation. Evelyn had warned me that this moment would be difficult, that watching them receive what they believed was everything would test my resolve. She had been right. Seeing their triumphant faces, hearing their immediate plans to liquidate Evelyn's memory for cash, made my chest tighten with grief and anger. To my granddaughter Natalie, Mr. Thompson continued, I leave my collection of business documents and corporate files housed in the filing cabinet in my home office. Patricia actually laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed through the conference room. Business documents? What business documents? Mother never had any business besides collecting Social Security checks. Isabella giggled along with her mother. Poor Natalie gets the boring paperwork while I get the house and jewelry. I guess that's fitting, considering she spent all that time playing secretary. They exchanged a look of shared amusement, their cruelty casual and automatic. I absorbed their mockery without reaction, knowing that their laughter would turn to something very different within the next few minutes. Evelyn's plan was working perfectly. They were so convinced of their victory that they wouldn't see the reversal coming until it was too late. Mr. Thompson closed the will and set it aside, but he made no move to conclude the meeting. Instead, he looked directly at me with an expression that suggested the real business was just beginning. As Patricia and Isabella continued their whispered celebration about renovation plans, a second attorney entered the conference room. Christine Walsh was a sharp-featured woman in her 40s who specialized in corporate law, and her presence immediately shifted the atmosphere. She carried a thick briefcase and wore the kind of confident expression that suggested she held information that would change everything. The moment of truth had arrived, and I could barely contain the anticipation that had been building for 3 years. Ladies, Mr. Thompson said, I'd like you to meet Christine Walsh from Pinnacle Holdings. She has some additional documents that pertain to Evelyn's estate. Patricia barely looked up from her conversation with Isabella about kitchen renovations. Additional documents? What kind of additional documents? The will was very clear. Christine settled into her chair and opened her briefcase with deliberate precision. Mr. Thompson is correct that the will addresses Evelyn's personal property, her home, jewelry, and savings account. However, Those items represent only a small fraction of Evelyn's total assets. Isabella's head snapped up from her phone where she had been texting friends about her inheritance. What do you mean, small fraction? Grandma wasn't wealthy. She lived in that tiny house and drove that old Toyota Camry. Evelyn Cooper was indeed very wealthy, Christine replied calmly. She simply chose to live modestly while building a substantial business empire. For the past 22 years, she owned controlling interests in 5 different companies, managed through a complex but legal corporate structure designed to protect her assets. The color began draining from Patricia's face. Business empire? That's impossible. My mother worked at the Postal Service for 30 years and then retired. She never mentioned any businesses. I watched my mother's confidence start to crumble as Christine spread corporate documents across the conference table. The papers bore Evelyn's signature, notarized dates going back decades, and financial statements that showed profits in the millions. Patricia picked up one document with trembling fingers, scanning the numbers with growing horror. These companies, Christine continued, include Summit Peak Consulting, a technology consulting firm that has contracted with major corporations throughout the Southwest for 15 years. Desert Rose Catering, which services high-end events throughout Phoenix and Scottsdale. Copper Canyon Development, a real estate partnership that has built 4 successful residential communities. Sunrise Solutions, a profitable marketing firm serving small businesses, and Cactus Creek Investments, a financial advisory service. Isabella's face had gone pale. How much are these companies worth? The combined value, based on the most recent appraisals, is approximately $18 million. The number hung in the air like a physical weight. Patricia made a small choking sound while Isabella gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Their celebration had transformed into stunned silence, replaced by the dawning realization that they had been operating under completely false assumptions about Evelyn's wealth. Where did the money come from? Patricia whispered. How could she afford to buy businesses? Christine consulted her notes. Evelyn began investing in 2002, using her father's life insurance settlement as initial capital. Instead of spending that money, she partnered with existing business owners who needed investors. Over time, she acquired controlling interest through careful reinvestment of profits. She was, by all accounts, an extremely shrewd businesswoman. I watched my mother's face cycle through disbelief, confusion, and growing dread. Patricia had always dismissed Evelyn as a simple woman who needed taking care of, never recognizing the sharp intelligence that had built an empire right under everyone's noses. The condescension Patricia had shown toward Evelyn's little hobbies was now revealed as willful blindness to her mother's remarkable success. The trap was set, and now came the moment that would change everything forever. But why didn't she tell us? Isabella demanded, her voice cracking with desperation. Why keep it secret? Christine's expression grew serious. Evelyn was very concerned about protecting these assets from potential creditors. She had observed certain gambling habits within the family and wanted to ensure that her business empire would remain intact. Patricia's face flushed red with humiliation and rage. The carefully hidden truth about her addiction was now exposed in front of lawyers and documented in corporate files that could never be denied or dismissed. Christine reached into her briefcase and withdrew another set of documents, these ones bearing more recent dates and signatures. Evelyn updated her corporate succession plan 18 months ago after careful consideration of who should inherit control of these businesses. Patricia lunged forward in her chair. Isabella is her primary heir. The will clearly states. The will addresses Evelyn's personal property, Christine interrupted firmly. Corporate ownership operates under different legal structures. These businesses were never part of her personal estate. They were held in trust with designated successors chosen based on Evelyn's assessment of their business acumen and financial responsibility. I felt my heart rate increase as the moment approached. For 3 years, I had known this day would come, but experiencing it felt surreal. Patricia and Isabella were about to learn that their assumptions about family hierarchy meant nothing in the face of Evelyn's careful planning. Who inherits the businesses? Isabella asked, her voice strained with anxiety. Christine turned to face me directly. Natalie Cooper has been designated as the primary successor for all 5 companies. She has been working closely with Evelyn for the past 3 years, learning the operations and meeting with management teams. The transition is designed to be seamless. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia stared at me as if seeing a stranger, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Isabella's perfect composure shattered completely, her face contorting with disbelief and fury. "That's impossible," Patricia finally managed to say. "Natalie doesn't know anything about business. She's never shown any interest in." "Actually," I said quietly, speaking for the first time since the lawyers had arrived, "I've been learning about these companies for 3 years. Every Tuesday and Thursday when I visited Grandma Evelyn, we went over financial reports, met with managers, and discussed long-term strategy. She was an incredible teacher." Isabella's eyes filled with tears of rage. You knew about the money this whole time and said nothing." "Evelyn asked me to keep the businesses confidential until after her death," I replied calmly. "She was concerned about protecting them from outside interference." Patricia's face twisted with understanding. "Outside interference? You mean my debts?" Christine nodded. Evelyn was very explicit about her concerns. She had observed multiple instances where family resources were lost to gambling debts, and she wanted to ensure that her business empire remained stable and productive. The weight of the revelation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Patricia realized that not only had she underestimated her own mother's wealth and intelligence, but that her gambling addiction had cost her family access to millions of dollars. $18 million? Isabella whispered, as if saying the number might make it less real. $18 million and you get all of it, Isabella said, her voice hollow with disbelief. "I inherited the responsibility of managing these companies," I corrected. "Evelyn built something remarkable, and she trusted me to continue her work." Patricia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This isn't fair. Isabella is the primary heir. There has to be some way to contest this." Christine's expression remained professional but firm. "The corporate succession has been legally established for years. Every document has been properly notarized, witnessed, and filed with appropriate authorities. Evelyn worked with multiple attorneys to ensure there would be no grounds for contest." The trap Evelyn had laid was perfect in its simplicity. She had given Patricia and Isabella exactly what they expected while protecting what truly mattered from their potential interference. Patricia began pacing behind her chair like a caged animal, her earlier triumph now transformed into desperate calculation. "There has to be something we can do. Some legal challenge, some way to prove that Mother wasn't in her right mind when she made these arrangements." Christine opened another folder with practiced efficiency. Evelyn anticipated such concerns. She underwent comprehensive psychological evaluation 6 months ago, specifically to demonstrate her mental competency. The results show her cognitive function was well above average for her age group. I watched my mother's face as each avenue of denial was systematically closed off. Evelyn had thought of everything, spending years building legal barriers that would protect her businesses from the very scenario that was unfolding now. "But the house," Isabella said desperately, "at least I still have the house and jewelry. That's something." Christine consulted her notes with an expression that suggested more bad news. "Unfortunately, there are some complications regarding those assets as well. Evelyn's creditors have been monitoring the estate, and there are significant liens against both the property and the jewelry collection." Patricia's face went white. "Liens? What liens?" "Your gambling debts, Patricia. Several casinos have obtained judgments against you over the past 2 years. They've been waiting for Evelyn's estate to settle, so they could collect against any inherited assets. The house and jewelry will need to be liquidated to satisfy those obligations." The final piece of Evelyn's protection strategy became clear. She had known that any assets left to Isabella would ultimately end up in Patricia's hands, and from there would be seized by creditors. By giving Isabella the house and jewelry, Evelyn had effectively given her nothing, worse than nothing, since Isabella would now be responsible for the legal proceedings required to transfer the assets to the casinos. Isabella collapsed back into her chair, tears streaming down her face. "So I get nothing? Nothing at all?" "You'll receive whatever remains after the creditors are satisfied," Mr. Thompson said gently. "Unfortunately, given the value of the liens versus the appraised value of the property and jewelry, there's unlikely to be any significant remainder." Patricia turned to face me with an expression of pure hatred. "You planned this. You manipulated her into cutting us out." "I helped Grandma Evelyn manage her businesses," I replied steadily. Everything else was her decision based on her observations of this family over many years. "This isn't over," Patricia snarled. "I'll find a way to fight this. I'll prove that you influenced her, that you took advantage of an elderly woman." Christine's voice cut through Patricia's threats with professional authority. I should mention that Evelyn documented her reasoning extensively. She kept detailed records of family interactions, including recordings of conversations where gambling debts were discussed. She also documented instances where family members made disparaging comments about her intelligence or business acumen. The recordings. I remembered Evelyn's small digital recorder, which she had started using after Patricia made particularly cruel comments about Evelyn's supposed senility. My grandmother had been building a legal defense against exactly the kind of challenge Patricia was threatening to mount. Patricia sank into her chair, the fight draining out of her as she realized the scope of Evelyn's preparation. Every contingency had been considered, every possible objection anticipated and countered. Evelyn had spent 3 years not just teaching me about her businesses, but building an unassailable legal fortress around the succession plan. I reached into my purse and withdrew a sealed envelope that Evelyn had given me 6 months before her death. "Grandma Evelyn asked me to give this to both of you after the legal proceedings were complete." Patricia and Isabella stared at the envelope as if it might explode. With trembling fingers, Patricia opened it and unfolded the handwritten letter inside. "My dear Patricia and Isabella," Patricia read aloud, her voice breaking. "If you are reading this, then my business empire has been revealed, and you understand the true scope of what you have lost. Patricia, your gambling addiction has cost this family over $300,000 in the past 5 years alone. Isabella, you have never shown interest in anything beyond spending money and acquiring possessions." Fresh tears spilled down Isabella's cheeks as Patricia continued reading. "Natalie spent 3 years learning about these businesses, not because she wanted to inherit them, but because she genuinely cared about my well-being and respected my intelligence. What you inherit, or fail to inherit, is the result of choices you made over many years. I hope you learn from this experience. Love, Mother." The conference room fell silent except for Isabella's quiet sobbing. When Patricia looked up at me, her expression had changed from anger to something closer to defeat. "She really planned all of this," Patricia said quietly. "Every detail." "Yes," I replied. "She spent 3 years making sure everything would be legally protected." 6 months later, Patricia and Isabella discovered that the gambling debts had grown to nearly $500,000 with compound interest and legal fees. The house and jewelry barely covered 2/3 of the debt, forcing Patricia into bankruptcy and destroying Isabella's credit rating. Both women were forced to find employment for the first time in years, working entry-level positions while I managed a business empire worth $18 million. Looking back on that day in the conference room, I realized that Grandma Evelyn had given me more than just financial security. She had taught me that true power comes from earning respect rather than demanding it, and that the most satisfying justice is simply allowing people to face the natural consequences of their own choices. The worthless burden had become the empire builder, exactly as Evelyn had planned.